Their support behind the Kids Online Safety Act after recent modifications were made. It passed the Senate in late July, but has stalled in the House.
You may have heard in the news recently of a bill called the Kids Online Safety Act. Sounds great, right? Until you start to think about how far the proposed censorship may extend. Around 100 years ago, Americans were grappling with a version of the exact same question. Is keeping kids safe worth total censorship of adult topics? In fact, the scenario is remarkably similar, a Republican Presbyterian attempting to wield censorship as a tool for moral good. In some ways, perhaps the fate of the Hays Code shows us what will happen if the act passes. So let's take a trip back to the 1920s and learn about the code that changed American film forever. After the invention of the synchronized sound film, or talkie, in 1927, these films quickly became the standard. Early films, even silent ones, were more risque than one might expect, some sparking backlash and moral objections. To be fair, these objections had a point. There were no age restrictions. Children were welcome to see any movie, from violent westerns to torrid romances. 1927 also brought one of the first attempts to curtail acceptable themes in film from the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, MPPDA, later simply MPA. The MPA was a trade association, essentially a group that lobbied the government in the interests of film business. Their Magna Charta, a list of themes to avoid in films, was categorized into don'ts and be carefuls. Absolutely forbidden were things like ridicule of the clergy and irreverent usage of religious language. The Charta developed into what we know as the Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, after then-president of the MPA, Will H. Hays. In 1930, a Jesuit priest, Daniel A. Lord, and a Catholic involved in the motion picture industry, Martin Hugh Quigley, were recruited to create the code out of the former Magna Charta. The code was permeated in Christian moral righteousness. Ministers could never be comedic or villainous characters, and those who broke the law must always be punished. The code, while somewhat effective, wasn't heavily enforced. Mae West, a playwright and actress, had a reputation for her openly sexual performances and support for gay rights. Early West pictures like She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel upheld her reputation, with lines like,
"Well, when I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better."
Aren't you forgetting that you're married?
I'm doing my best.
The continued release of such films caused the creation of the Catholic Legion of Decency in 1934, designed to protest against sinful films that they claimed were creating a sex mania in America. When the Legion planned boycotts, Hays quickly acquiesced to their demands, reportedly telling his negotiator, Joseph Breen, that the Catholic authorities can have anything they want. After negotiations, the MPA created the Production Code Administration to censor films and uphold the code. Of course, it wasn't legally binding, but major studios agreed, afraid that the government would step in and create even more restrictive censorship, and so the days of the code began. Films that met the code got a seal of approval, and those that fell short had scripts reworked, scenes cut, and entire plots altered. Not everyone was willing to accept these restrictions, however. Howard Hughes, whose 1943 film The Outlaw placed an extremely strong emphasis on the sexualization of actress Jane Russell, leveraged its friction with code standards and added the tagline, "The picture that couldn't be stopped." Another touchy subject was politics. In 1940, the Three Stooges short, You Nasty Spy, was the first ever film released to parody the Nazis. Post-World War II, restrictions began loosening. As American audiences saw an increasing amount of more explicit code-defying films imported, the code slackened. Above all, though, there was one aspect of the code that remained untouched: sexual perversion, by which it meant homosexuality. Then, 1959, and what many consider the last straw for the code's efficacy, Some Like It Hot. Some Like It Hot seemed to flaunt the code more than it followed it. Set in the 20s Prohibition era, the film depicted gangsters, speakeasies, passionate romance, and of course, cross-dressing. Everything culminates in what is perhaps one of the most famous movie endings of all time.
Osgood, I'm gonna level with you. We can't get married at all.
Why not?
But you don't understand, Osgood. I'm a man.
Well, nobody's perfect.
Although the turn of the 1960s spelled the beginning of the end for the code, it took until 1968 for it to make way for what would become our modern rating system. Will Hays was dead, and Joseph Breen had long since left the Production Code Administration. New president of the MPA, Jack Valenti's final elimination of the code felt more like a mercy killing than anything else, and that's a comparison that certainly wouldn't have made it through the censors. The code was more than just a restriction on explicit sexuality and violence in film. It censored society, further adding taboo to budding discussions of race, class, sex, and gender. The code arguably changed our modern-day perception of American society during its enforcement. So the next time an official proposes a more child-friendly media landscape, it's worth examining through the lens of censorship.